Clockworks and Milk Lines. By Criterion_Infection. Growing up, the ultimate flex was a koi pond. Our family got one, after the family across the street had bought a big screen TV, because just buying a TV set with an even bigger screen would have been crass. My dad thought that buying a TV, like that with a baby on the way, was an outrage. My mom was sure that, with a gap like that, their second child was certainly an accident. After the pond was installed and stocked, my family invited everyone on our street over for a summer solstice soiree, under the pretext of watching our night blooming flowers bloom, while sampling a few tasty and tasteful hors d'oeuvres. I'm sorry that you had to read that, but that's really how my mom talked. If a few of our guests left envious, then all the better. For the record, I had no part in my parents' scheme, and wished that the neighbors with the TV were hosting the solstice, but the east side of the street always hosts the solstice on odd years. Their daughter had done well in school that year, and they were going to buy her a Neo Geo with the game, Magician Lord, upon the latter's release later that summer. Everyone was invited, and almost everyone came. The only holdout was the most attuned woman on the street, and the only person whom my parents actually liked. She declined the same way every year regardless of who was hosting. "I love the solstice, don't go out on the solstice." The phrase was a meme on our street. My dad gave all the guests a tour of the pond as they came. The pond wasn't very big, so the tour was really just a slow, 2-minute circumambulation during which, he proudly pointed out that the turnover rate of the filtration system was the entire volume of water once an hour, and introduced the koi. The Tancho Kohaku, a white fish with a red spot on its head, was named Little Red Riding Hood, and the Jinran Platinum, a fish with scales that shimmered like ice crystals in sunlight, was named Snow White. Every guest had to hear to that same tour as it was given to each subsequent guest, so the early arrivals go to hear as mispronunciations of Tancho, Kohaku, and Jinran over and over. I spent the evening with the daughter of the family with the TV. She was a grade ahead of me at a different school, and occupied that liminal space between friend and acquaintance. Everyone left, and the father of the TV family had left angry. It was a great success for my parents. My mom was in such high spirits that she agreed to heat a bowl of gazpacho for me. Every other time I asked, she insisted that I either eat it cold or not at all. Later that summer, everyone on the street was invited to the grand opening of our neighbor's koi pond, newly converted from a swimming pool, the only one on the street. Crassness be damned, he had one-upped my dad. My parents begrudgingly accepted the invitation. My mom baked cookies to bring. I was really excited that I might get to play Magician Lord. The mother greeted us at the door in the scandalous kimono of black and white silk that began my pubescence. I didn't understand how she could wear that and then just open the door like it was nothing. Her hair was worthy of a shampoo commercial and held in a bun by a pair of chopsticks. The vulgarity of her beauty was intoxicating. She led us to the backyard. Their pond dwarfed ours, and the size, variety, and number of fish was beyond anyone's expectations. They were even better lit. The father pronounced words like Sanshaku, which means 3 colors, like he hadn't spent the 5 minutes before everyone arrived practicing reading them aloud from a handwritten note. Aquatic plants grew up from the bottom of the pond. The father said that the pond had to be deep so the fish could hide from raccoons at the bottom. The conversation devolved into speculation on which species of local wildlife could catch and eat a koi. All of their conversations devolved, but this one was especially stupid. Do skunks eat meat? What's the difference between a possum and an opossum? A general consensus that fisher cats and coyotes were the most dangerous predators gradually emerged, and the party began to die down, but the hosts weren't finished. The mother had taken advantage of the lull to sneak into the kitchen and bring a sushi platter out. It was fish, but raw. There were audible gasps. Her husband pulled the chopsticks from her bun like the sword from the stone and, without spearing it, grabbed and ate a piece. "He can use chopsticks!" shouted someone. After that climax, the afterglow gave a few guests the courage to try a piece for themselves. Our most attuned neighbor, the lady who doesn't go out on the solstice, tried a piece and smiled. She always struck me as a bit too serene to be truly happy about anything. The entire night was a coup for the west side of the street from which we feared we would never recover, and I hadn't had the pleasure of even looking at their TV set to how big the screen was. The worst part was that you can play as a ninja or a samurai in Magician Lord, and the thematic resonance had totally eluded the hosts. We got a call the next day to come back. Even I was beginning to get annoyed with that family, but there was something growing at the bottom of the pond. They all agreed that it was a sign. It was surely a plant. It had a stem and everything. The part at the top might have been a bud. It was wispy, and its pearlescence was ethereal. It floated atop the stem like a drop of blood in water. One of the neighbors had an underwater camera, and he dived down to take a picture, another victory for the West Side. If they couldn't identify it by the time that the film was developed, then they would mail the picture to their connections. They spent the next few days looking through their books, and the connections looked through theirs, but it wasn't in any of the books. Without her pool, the neighbor's daughter rode her bike more often, and we began to spend more time together. She had been her school's star swimmer in her age group last year, but she was moving up to the next group in September and was worried that she wouldn't win any ribbons if she had nowhere to practice. The growth spurt that she was expecting hadn't happened, either. She told me that her mother had begun swimming naked in the koi pond at night. It's a shame that Renoir hadn't lived to paint that. The lighting was perfect. At some point in the following days, the plant was consumed. The couple said that a fish ate it. They blamed their friskiest Shiro Yutsuri, a black and white variety of koi that fondly reminds me of a cow. They said that the fish had already died. Rumors abounded that the fish had eaten the plant and been executed for the crime. The fish had eaten the plant and then been eaten by the wife, or the wife had eaten it herself and killed the fish as part of a cover-up. Koi are delicate, though, and often succumb to ailments like fin rot and parasitism. Did you know that koi can get herpes? They gave her the benefit of the doubt until she changed. My friend woke up one day, and her mother was stuffing her possessions into a trash bag. The mix of genuine trash, junk, family heirlooms, and treasured toys that still held a piece of the childhood that she had aged past, and miscellanea like a comb even included gifts that she had given her. Her mother was making room. Her father tried to intervene, but he was persuaded in conversations to which their daughter wasn't privy. He began to make room too. They weren't just clearing her room out. Every week on trash night, more and more bags appeared. When they ran out of bags, they just left piles on the curb. They didn't have room for new trash bags. Trash pickers prowled the neighborhood and took all the good stuff. My dad got the big screen, the Neo Geo, and Magician Lord. Everyone paid lip service to the daughter's fate, but no one tried to help her. They acted like it was natural for life to be so unkind, as if a tornado had emptied her home and not the man and woman who had sworn with their bodies to protect her. I tried to salvage as much of her belongings as I could. After all the clothes that she wasn't wearing were thrown away one day, she started coming over to my house to change. My mom did agree to do her laundry. She was sad, and I was sad because she was sad, so I told her what I did when I was sad. I told her about Europa, the moon of Jupiter. It's far from the sun and covered in ice, but there's an ocean under the ice. I imagine the life in that ocean. They must be so strong to live there under the ice in the shadow of a giant. I was sure that they went their whole lives without knowing that anything can hurt them. When I told her that she reminds me of those space lobsters, she laughed in the way that you can only laugh when you're crying. As her mother continued making room, her father made a room. Her room was in the attic directly below the widow's walk. Board by board, he built 4 walls around it and a roof over it. Imagine an impeccably maintained Victorian house, now drop a shack on it. The windowless nursery loomed over the street, and they began to worry. I went to my neighbor, the attuned one who refused to go out on the solstice. She had a very affectionate polydactyl cat that purred in my lap. I told her that I was scared and didn't know what was happening. We sipped an herbal infusion as she listened. She asked me about Europa. I wasn't sure if I had brought it up to her before, but it had been my go-to conversation starter for a few months by then. I told her how safe it made me feel, and she took me up to her widow's walk. Hers was the only house on the east side of the street to have one. She brought her telescope up with us. She showed me Jupiter and 4 of his lovers, the Galilean moons Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. She told me that it takes a lot of looking, but you can begin to understand the moons. She told me to start by tracking it through the sky. I don't know how long I looked before she got a phone call. My friend's mother had given birth. We didn't know what the child was, but we all agreed that it was a sign. The child smelled like a baby and had the skin of one, albeit cold and clammy. The child even looked and felt like an inside-out clam. The child was squishy, then hard, and finally empty. The child didn't breathe and had eyes of glass. We looked through our books. The child was either a doll or an automaton. We didn't know which, only time would tell. We all hoped that the child was a doll. The child lived in the nursery. The father installed a pull-down staircase. It was locked for most of the day, but whenever the mother went up to nurse the child, my friend had to leave her room. At night, she could hear the child. She wasn't getting much sleep, nutrition, or exercise. She didn't want to play Magician Lord anymore. She lay motionless on her front lawn most days. I didn't know that evil could be so open, that you could just pull your crimes out of the dark corners of your house to the curb to be taken away. She was our sunlit sin, and the scales growing over her calcifying heart shimmered blindingly. One day, She tried to bury herself. Europa and I weren't speaking, so that night I sat by our koi pond after everyone had fallen asleep. My dad had built a chicken wire cover over the pond to protect Little Red Riding Hood and Snow White. I thought about their namesakes. I thought about what I had to do to be worthy of having heard their tales. Heroism called. Ian was going to protect my friend from all the wolves and mothers out there. I climbed the outside of her house up to her third-story window. That wasn't the heroic part. It was a really easy house to climb, and the window was open. They were lucky that we lived in such a good neighborhood. I slipped under her bed. She was a heavy sleeper. I could hear the child, too. The child was louder whenever I was almost dozing off, but it babbled incessantly. The child knew that I was there, but I didn't try to escape. That wasn't the heroic part. I was just too scared to move. In the morning, her mother woke her. She left, and I heard the staircase unlock. I heard footsteps. The babbling stopped. I slipped out from under the bed. I took off my shoes to be quieter. I thought that the element of surprise would be important. I had no plan. I sneaked up to the nursery. The floor creaked. The mother turned to me. Her wispy milk hung up from the unoccupied breast in ethereal opalescence. The relationship between the mother and the automaton was parasitic in all but intimacy. Dolls suckle, automata milk like milkmaids with better things to do. I just stood there. That wasn't the heroic part. There was no heroic part. I walked downstairs. My friend was surprised to see me there, but I kept my head down. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't answer any of her questions, so I ignored them. I left. I went to my attuned neighbor that night. We listened to Europa as she babbled through frozen teeth. She agreed to let my friend leave her house. She was passed from family to family as a free trial for a second-class daughter. The guy with the underwater camera adopted her, not legally, but we had our ceremony. Her parents had thrown her robe away, so she wore a t-shirt and jeans. She looked stupid. I gave all of her stuff back to her, but she had no use for them. They were grave goods now. The problem of her parents still remained. Each day, they became less erratic. They moved along tracks and performed the same actions at the same times every day. Feeding the koi was not one of those actions, and they were dead without dying. They still swam, but they were death black, the black of the putrefaction and fuzzy necrophages. They darted to and fro like ink strokes. We barred all the doors and windows. We gave them whatever food would fit through the mail slot, mostly quarter-pounders with cheese. We stopped when they piled up uneaten against the front door. They shambled around in their empty house. Their hair grew. Their nails grew. They sweat. The sores on their bodies multiplied. They never missed a step of their dance, and the choreography of neglect continued as the blood of their footsteps fell anew onto the same footprints until they walked on skeletal toes. We were content to forget about them, but the walls of the nursery began to bulge. Only she could purify the home. We have a ceremony for that, but it's really just to hype the purifier up. We unsealed the home and gave her the knife. We lined the porch and wouldn't let her leave. She was a real danger to all of us with that knife, and forcing her into the home was a rare act of courage for us. Her parents walked along their circuit without seeing her. She tried to talk to them. We were all listening, but no one really heard her. The meaning of her words was divided among us and diffused to nothing. Eventually, she purified them. She purified her father in the back and then her mother in the front in the vain hope of better closure though eye contact. As usual, neither suffered. She had to kill the automaton and the fish, too. When she went to the nursery, she pulled the stairs down, and they led directly into the child's babbling mouth. She walked back downstairs and out the back door. She waded into the koi pond and speared the fish one by one. As she emerged, the effect was more Bosch than Renoir. She pulled her t-shirt up to make a pouch and carried the fish to the nursery. I cannot describe the rotten gurgles that we heard. We knew that it was over when milk poured down the stairs. We were waiting for her when she came down the stairs. The milk of human kindness, shouted someone. They all laughed and then clapped for her. I felt so stupid in my robes. She was the best of us, and we had wreathed her in fish guts. She didn't move like her parents, but a wind-up key had been plunged into her heart too. The automaton had twisted it. Her parents had twisted it. All of them had twisted it. Europa had twisted it, but who was her lover? Jupiter had twisted it, but who was his father? Saturn had twisted it, but who was his father? Uranus had twisted it, but who was his mother? I had twisted it and would never again see her unwound. The mechanism of alienation turned within her. The attuned one and I looked at each other. She looked too serene to be sad. Thanks for listening. The link to the Reddit post are in the description below. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.